do not. Okay.
There we go. Okay, HTTP3 support, whose topic is this? Anyone?
I'm guessing it's Steven's, who is not here.
Okay. Then let's move to Mitch's topic, tag API discussion.
Sorry about that. I think Steve got stuck in traffic, so he might be here for the last half of the meeting if it goes that long. So we've been talking for a couple months now about the tag API and how we will upgrade ambient mode. I guess I can share the doc. I've added a section to sort of sum up all of the different alternatives that we've discussed in this meeting, and to try and compare them sort of to what I've proposed and contrast example or advantages. Sorry, trying to click while talking is not great. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so remember that we're talking about, or at least my proposal, there's other things we're talking about, but my proposal was to create a tag API that looks like this. It's really just a name pointing to a revision, which is exactly what a tag is today. This just formalizes that as a CRD. Today it exists sort of implicitly. This is the alternatives considered section. And I compared like if we just carried forward with no changes, what the pros and cons would be. Costin has proposed using gateway class in lieu of tags, and so I sort of compared and contrasted that, as well as I've made the proposal, and Lynn had a suggestion as well that was like a CRD that looks just like the one I've proposed, but is not for sidecar mode, and therefore probably not called tag anything, but come up with a new name for tags in Ambient. And then I have a little table sort of summarizing the 4 kind of objectives that I'm measuring everything against that you'll see listed in each of these pros and cons. Is I would like it to be compatible with how the tag CLI works today, so that users can take advantage of their existing automation. If they've built on top of that, they're not having to learn anything new. All of these are things that I would like to see. I don't know that they are necessarily requirements. We could go without them. So that's the CLI, particularly the Istio control command. Consistent with the sidecar. In other words, you would use the one API or command to upgrade both ambient waypoints and Istio sidecars, as well as standard Istio ingress and egress gateways. I think really having 2 mechanisms for doing this so that you have like a sidecar upgrade step and then you have a waypoint upgrade step is not a good idea personally. GitOps friendliness, we talked a lot about how the existing process for tags, the istio-ctl CLI, is not GitOps friendly. It's very difficult to look at a Git repo and see what tags are present in it, and to reason about those, because we don't save them as tags. We save them as this thing down here, a giant mutating webhook configuration. So hard to reason about changes, etc. I have been meaning to, but I haven't gotten around to giving an example of like a pull request for changing tags in this mode that we have today versus my proposal. I hope to add that soon. And then the last is one of the objectives, and I feel really strongly about this one. We should not have mutating webhooks present in ambient mode if sidecar mode is disabled. That's a security vulnerability. So those are the ways that I'm sort of judging these different options, but I wanted to invite you all to consider that. I also wanted to ask, we've been talking about this since early January, since we came back from break. We are supposed to go to alpha in the 1.18 release, whose code freeze is somewhere less than 4 weeks away. Is that right? So I would like to try to arrive at consensus in the very near future to move this conversation forward.
So Mitch, I don't think anything changed. I don't think we're addressing the comments that I had about creating a full-blown CRD. I mean, when we try to stay clear of creating CRDs for far more commonly used things, just for the sake of a feature that it's blown out of proportion, because you are trying to cover the entire world, change how tags work in sidecar. For Ambient, we have a very narrow problem, really. I mean, for Z-tunnel, it's clearly it's just how do we manage the waypoints and maybe gateways for. And I don't think we are ready to commit to an API called tags that it's confusing and impact sidecars and all the other stuff, just to do a very simple thing that we could put a config map like mesh config and be done with it for this release in particular. I completely agree. I mean, there is no disagreement that we should not put it in the injection, but from not putting it in injection to let's create a new CRD and discuss RBAC and it's a huge distance. So maybe we find something in the middle that it's possible.
So if we use config maps, how would you look at a cluster and say what tags are present?
How do you look at tags? You go to Kube API server, get config map named Istio tags, and read the content. There is no difference between a config map in Istio system and a CRD.
Okay. So we would have one config map that governs all tags regardless of revision?
I don't know. I mean, it's something that is specific to the upgrade process. It's not something that it's such an important thing to worry too much about. It's just for waypoint upgrade. I don't think if at this point we need to worry. I mean, with all the alpha things, where we put an alpha config map to be blocked on it for too much. So if you don't treat it as an API that we need to maintain it forever and it has all the API reviews and all the defects, it's just a small feature. Hey, we upgrade this way and Istio cattle contract with Istio Ds have this config map. It's just a trivial implementation detail, like the 1,000 flags we have and environment variables.
Kostin, as soon as we expose this to users, we are committed to supporting it. It doesn't matter if it's a CRD or a config map or a file that we mount on Istio D. Users are going to need to interact with this on a regular basis, and changing it will break them.
Yes and no. I mean, I think John at least is trying to make it very clear that everything in Ambient at this point is alpha except a very small subset. And we have a very clear policy that environment variables, even if you use them and those kind of things, there is a progression. You start with alpha, you have testing, you go to all the bars to get to a stable API. But it's not true that every environment variables or experimental feature we had needs to be maintained forever and can never be changed. There's a progression. Eventually, you may end up with a CRD. Who knows?
Yeah,
but
so I would as an alpha API, not a beta.
That's kind of not how we are doing stuff. I mean, we have, we usually start with experimental and CRD process, at least so far, has been a bit higher bars than other things. What? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, before we start building this high-level user experience around upgrades of waypoints, we should at least make sure we can do any upgrade of waypoint, because the way I understand right now, the data path doesn't allow any restarts at all. You'll lose traffic. So if you say we have API that allows you to upgrade waypoints, we should at least guarantee it doesn't break traffic, right?
Yeah, very good point. I mean, I think, sorry, I missed that. Yes, I mean, first, let's verify the upgrade works before we commit to the API. I mean, let's see how, because we don't have too much experience upgrading waypoints so far. I mean, we don't know how, maybe Istio will do it automatically, but there is no need for API. Maybe there is no need for user to control it. Maybe it's not possible. That was kind of the whole thing. I mean, we don't even know what the user experience will be without going through at least one upgrade. And
so we end-to-end tests, which already upgrade waypoints, checked into the code base.
Mitch, I don't think it can work, because the way I understand that the tunnel and the HTTP connect work is that there's no way to push back on TCP connections to drain. And if you upgrade anything on data path that involves connect, it doesn't propagate. So you'll just lose HTTP connections within.
So this document does not address, I think what you're talking about is whether the upgrade can be hitless or not. We initially decided back in like November when we first talked about this, that hitless upgrades may or may not make it into open source, that it was something that would be nice to have, but that we weren't sure exactly how it would work with Z-tunnel and waypoints, etc. Regardless of whether the upgrade is hitless or not, we still have to support customers upgrading. We cannot ship a product that is not possible to upgrade. So we've added functionality that allows waypoints to be upgraded today. The way that it works is one SDOD must control all waypoints in the cluster. When you upgrade that SDOD, it automatically upgrades all the waypoints. No tags, no revisions, no possibility for rolling back without rolling back the whole control plane. This proposal would allow us to have a process that is similar to the process we follow today for sidecars. I totally agree that hitless is important. Someone should be working on it. That someone is not me. That's not my skill set. I don't know enough about Z-tunnels to or H-bone to talk about how to drain them, etc.
But you are interfering with that work because you are proposing an API that may or may not be possible to implement. I mean, if the hitless upgrade requires SDOD to orchestrate the update without user control and without, then your API will stay in the way because we are promising that this tag will do something and whatever that spec is saying, and that may interfere with other upgrades options because again, it's not something that.
This API will absolutely work today. Using the technology that we have today. Upgrades already happen today when you upgrade SDOD. This just gives users control over when that happens. Whether or not that upgrade is hitless is not something that this API gets us to. I think it should be hitless. I think someone should be working on that, but that's not what this API is about. And quite frankly, if we're so concerned about the upgrades not being hitless that we would recommend a user never upgrade, we cannot launch this product.
Let's not twist what said. I mean, what I think Quat and me are saying is that right now the upgrade process is not very well established. We never did an upgrade of Z-tunnel because we haven't shipped it yet. And it is far too premature to define APIs for something that we never did. For Istio, we introduced revision and tags after about 5 or 6 releases where we did upgrades without them. And then it was 2 or 3 releases where we discussed it, got feedback, figure out how it is. And we ended up with an API that is not perfect. I mean, Istio got all tags and putting it, I agree with you, but you know, Istio didn't explode because it didn't have a tag API as a CRD.
Right, and we heard loud and clear from our users that they absolutely loathed having their upgrade process changed 3 times in 1 year in terms of best practices from the Istio team. That was a huge pain point for our users that I would very much like to not recreate in Ambient.
I have a hard time understanding why this is such a big deal to a user experience. I mean, it's an implementation detail, right? They use the Istio cuddle command to operate it anyways. So is it an improvement? Potentially, but it's not like a groundbreaking difference, right? Most users won't even notice that it changed.
That's right. That my expectation is that most users, unless they're using GitOps, will not see much of a change. Ambient will upgrade the same way sidecars do.
I think we agreed on the same point, but drew a different conclusion from it. That was my point. Is this something that we need now anyways? Like if we want to add it later, it's not like we're making a radical change later that users have to adopt to, right?
As far as I can tell, we do not have a viable alternative.
We do. It's to use the webhook.
So just continue creating mutating webhook configs, giving SDOD root, or not SDOD, or the user. Actually, it would be SDOD. We found that SDOD always gets that. So,
I think we're way too early to be exploring a world where we run without sidecars.
Sorry?
I think we're way too early to even be considering a mode where we have sidecars entirely disabled.
We won't get there at some point for sure, but it's
like I'm not saying this is a bad proposal. To be clear, I think it's probably a good idea. It might be a bit premature. Like this only has any benefits really, other than like some minor ones. Once we have a world where there's no sidecars whatsoever, and given we haven't even launched Ambient, introducing a new CRD, which is effectively permanent, is a bit premature because it relies on the assumption that we're going to have users running without sidecars whatsoever. Not just not using them, but like literally explicitly disable the ability to use them, which is a kind of big leap.
So basically, we don't make sidecar mode something you can disable. Anytime you're in Istio, sidecar mode is active, you need root privileges to the cluster.
I
Not in
think
this
that's something we
release.
will do eventually, but it's not something we're doing. Yeah, like we haven't even launched the alpha of Ambient, right? So it's a bit premature
Yeah.
because we're committing this API that impacts everyone. So my big fear in general, and we had this issue with the Gateway API, is in order to support some experimental alpha thing, we introduce a more stable API, and then that experimental thing is experimental, right? So it changes all the time. And now we're stuck with this more stable API because you see what I mean?
Yeah, I understand that. The tag and revision API is something that we have already promoted to beta in the existing sidecar mode. So this is not experimental or new. This works exactly the same way that it worked before. There's some implementation detail changes in terms of how they're persisted to the cluster, but the CLI that we tell users to make use of, which as I understand it is beta today, stays functional. We see improvements for GitOps users. You're right, John. If we were to not do this, to simply continue the status quo until we're ready to go to a ambient only mode, that could potentially work for our users. I'm just curious why an API that we've had for years that's at beta support that has one field in it is controversial for the group.
Any new CRD is a very, 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 very high bar. So
And
like
also,
we added proxy config, for example. It sounded great to everyone, I think. Has anyone used proxy config? As far as I know, it was kind of a waste of time, right?
And a lot of other API CRDs that we added, I mean, is the early day with Mixer, when pretty much everything had a CRD, and we had 100 CRDs, and people started to complain we have too many CRDs to understand. But Mitch, I think we are making some assumptions here. I mean, with Gateway, for example, we had a install that was bundled with Istio. Like you said, we changed it many times. We had an install that was based on Helm chart, one install based on injection, and now we are finally converging on a yet another different installer. Istio is completely managing, and user doesn't have to do anything basically. So revision is great. It was not a bad idea at the time. It doesn't mean that we are stuck doing revision-based upgrade forever for everything. Gateways, for example, I don't think there is any concept of revision-based upgrade in upstream Kubernetes Gateway API. Each controller is free to do its best to actuate and to make it happen however it fits without any user intervention. Same thing is probably true for tags, because the next evolution step for revision-based upgrade is fully automated upgrade, where we take care of the upgrade without user having to deal with tags. I'm not convinced that tag is something that user must be aware forever and must be something we support, and we always must have user to actually interfere with that and to not let us do the better options, really.
Okay, so I've heard a lot from John and Costin. It sounds like there's consensus between them that we should continue with the status quo until such a time as we're ready to disable sidecar mode for our users. Are there other opinions on that proposal?
So, Mitch, I guess I have a question for you. Is this major issue for you for sidecar, or is this major issue for you for ambient? Because with ambient, what I'm seeing is we don't really have this issue because we are going to support sidecar. Like the ambient profile we have is going to support sidecar for the near future, right? Probably for at least a year, and even probably more. So the issue probably resides back to the sidecar world. Is that what you see with your user that have this problem?
I see two problems, and one of them I think you're right on the nose for. As soon as we want users to be capable of running ambient without sidecar mode, we need to not have mutating webhook configs as part of our installation. I think that there will be users interested in making use of ambient in net new clusters as soon as we call it alpha, who are not interested in using sidecars. At that point, the mutating webhook is simply a vulnerability with no benefit to it. So when that happens, we do need some sort of new way to represent tags. The other benefit, the second, is for GitOps. GitOps users today effectively cannot make use of tags because we do not have an API. And because you're required to run a CLI in your GitOps environment, which is just not a thing. So for both sidecar users and ambient users, we need an API for tags. Whether that's a config map based API or a CRD, we need something that you can clearly see. There's a tag with this name, it pointed to this revision, now it's been updated to point to that revision, here are the other tags. But those are the two motivations I have here.
Okay, that makes sense. So based on what you are saying and what I'm hearing with everybody, it sounds like config map has a very low bar as an entry point to introduce something in Istio because it's not like a standard API we standardize, but you can still configure it. Would that be a intermediate solution as you know, there are more people looking at supporting Ambient without sidecar? I think that your CRD, what you're proposing here, would rise to the top, would be much more make sense for when the scenario arises from, I guess, more than one user or vendor.
Using config maps in lieu of a CRD is completely viable from a technological standpoint. It will work well for GitOps users. It will eliminate mutating webhook configs for ambient only mode. That's all great. However, if we view it as an intermediate step to later introducing an API, we're again asking our users to change their integration point. For the first year, you can modify this config map and it will change how things are upgraded. Then a year later, now you're going to need to learn about a CRD that looks just like the config map that you'll need to modify. So I would not be in favor of considering that as an intermediate step. As a permanent step, it could work.
Mitch, I mean, we keep telling users not to use alpha CRDs because they are experimental. We keep saying that it's alpha means we can modify it, but you are saying that the main motivation for adding the CRD is that it cannot be changed later and users will not change it. I mean, pick one of them. Either it's an alpha CRD that will change and eventually become a beta, maybe with a different form, because who knows, it's an alpha, or it's not going to change, and then we have a completely different discussion. I mean, you cannot make both arguments at the same time.
We have the ability to change any API that we introduce as alpha, whether it's a config map or a CRD or a Helm option. We have the ability to change it. I would be opposed to introducing any option that we expect to change in the coming 12 months. It's one thing to say, if we got it wrong, we might be able to dial it in later. It's another thing to say, we're shipping it today, we know it's wrong, and we'll fix it later.
And that's how we ended up with all the crappy APIs we have in Istio, because we said that, hey, it's alpha, we don't need to review it too much, we don't need to have experience, we don't have to have feedback, let's put it alpha because we may change it later. And then the argument changed immediately after, saying, hey, we have alpha, we don't want user to change, we have to keep the same API and promote it to beta because, I mean, I don't know. We should not repeat the same mistake again. So how about we wait on a release or two? I mean, let's have some feedback upgrading. Let's see how it works.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Costin? I missed it.
Let's wait a bit because all things it's alpha release of Ambient. Let's just keep it as an, you know, alpha experimental, so to make sure users do not start using it too early. And in one release, after we get more feedback and we find out it's viable or not, to do it completely automated without any user intervention, then we can discuss it again.
I'm curious what sort of feedback we'll get on an API that doesn't exist. I'm not clear on that.
Config map, put a config map or an option, install option or something similar.
So users still have the option today, right? They run the Istio cuddle command. So that option always exists, right? Because that's the option for the sidecar for them to indicate tags or revisions. So that would continue to work. Is that what you're proposing, Costin?
Yep.
I'm having a hard time understanding what's wrong with the webhook for alpha. Like, the issue with the webhook seems to be that it's a slight security escalation, but we're talking about an alpha. There's plenty of security issues in Ambient. I'm just not sure why we can't just stick with the webhook in the short term. Like, what is a config map short term? I think I agree with Mitch's concern. I don't want to go from webhook to config map to tag. But I'm not sure why we need the intermediate state. Can we just stick with webhook for now, and if we want to do tag later, we go to tag?
Sorry,
I would be more in favor of that than an intermediate API.
I only proposed config map because if you absolutely cannot use webhook, if you can stick with webhooks, then that's the best option because less problems for existing users, and it's easier transition. And when we are ready to get rid of sidecars, then we can do whatever is necessary.
Yeah, agreed. I saw the webhook. I thought there was an issue with the GitHub approach. Would that work with the GitHub approach? That's the only reason I was suggesting it.
This proposal would not help the GitOps approach at all in the short term, not until we arrive at an API for them to use.
Okay.
Just to be clear, though, like you can still use GitOps. It's just you have a little bit larger. Well, not a little bit. It's a much larger config, but it's not like it's impossible to use GitOps.
And you have to be able to hand edit mutating webhook configs to represent tags. The CLI does not support operating on files in all of its modes.
I mean, you can use the generate command, right?
No.
I mean, people are using tags. Every serious user uses GitOps. I haven't seen people complain about it. It's clearly possible. It may be better with the tag API. I'm not doubting that, but it's not like people can't use GitOps and tags today.
Can we clarify?
GitOps to manage their Istio installation today. Most of them are hand upgrading. Most of them also do not use tags according to our latest upgrade surveys. In the last survey, we did not find any users who use tags and revisions.
Oh, wow.
Mitch, to clarify, you cannot use GitOps to upgrade Istio. That's what you're saying.
I am saying that it is a very high friction process. I've got a demo of how to do it. I've presented it. However, like if you just change one tag, the pull request is extremely confusing. It's like a 20-line change in a very highly sensitive object within Kubernetes. It should be a one-line change.
Yes, but again, you can still use GitOps for everything else. You can deploy pods, you can do everything except upgrading or managing Istio. That's the only thing that is really broken.
Yes, I'm talking about managing your Istio installation, install, upgrades, virtual services and stuff like that. Sure, you put those in GitOps and they're relatively low friction.
Yep. And for, that's a high privilege operation. It's a very high risk. It's not the problem that the tag is missing in GitOps. The problem is that to do a safe upgrade from Istio, from GitOps, you need to restart some pods. It's not only just deep applying. I mean, you need to do some checks. I mean, you know how managed upgrade works. You cannot just apply some config and leave it. If it's there, there is some check some metrics that you don't crash something, do some stepping. That is not something that is fully GitOps friendly.
Well, I mean, that's precisely what GitOps does, incidentally. It applies config, and then it checks to see if that application was successful and resulted in the desired state. If it didn't, it will roll back the config that it has applied. So I think we have more or less agreement. Unless someone objects, for the alpha, we will use the status quo, which is that tags will be used to upgrade waypoints, but they will be represented as mutating webhook configs using exactly the same API as today. And we will reevaluate the tag API proposal once we have some sort of feedback on how users are upgrading Ambient. Is that?
I agree, and I just want to be clear. I am not saying we should reevaluate later as like a nice way to say like, go away. I genuinely think this is probably a good idea. I just don't think it's the right time to do it. And I think we should wait.
Maybe we should set a timeline to revisit. Yeah, definitely after alpha is released. It's particularly when people start looking at upgrade. Maybe before beta release, we should definitely checkpoint on this again to see if it's a good time.
So do we have a good way to collect the user? Nate's in the room. Sorry, the camera isn't working to include everyone. He just raised the question: how would we collect that user feedback?
I think that's a general problem we need with Ambient, right? We're shipping Ambient Alpha as a means to get feedback, which is, I almost wonder if we should do like a survey, just like we do with upgrades, like put it in the getting started docs to say, hey, once you try this out, give us feedback or something. I don't know. You're probably better than us at that, Mitch. So I'm kind of looking to you to answer your own question.
So surveys.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've done surveys in the past. We get about 10-ish responses for each upgrade. And we would certainly want to add and expand the 118 survey to cover information about Ambient. And then again, 119. That being said, we've often not received feedback on things that we hope to receive feedback on. For instance, the 117 or 116 upgrade survey, nobody used tags or revisions at all. So we didn't get any feedback on how that worked.
Yeah, I feel like, and maybe this is naive, I just feel like on an Ambient survey, like Ambient's so hyped, and it's much more interesting to give a feedback on Ambient than the upgrade from 116 to 117, right? Like I think Cilium did a survey on their service mesh thing, and I think I saw they got like hundreds of responses or something.
Yeah, they have a beta program. It's like amazing response. Maybe we should look into running something similar for Istio. Yeah.
Are we aware of any big customers today that might actually, are really excited about Ambient, want to try it out, that kind of thing? People that maybe are experienced with Istio already. Anybody have any information there?
I mean, yeah, there's certainly users that are interested in trying Ambient. So yeah.
Okay, so Solo's got users. Then maybe what we need to do is identify some, I don't want to call them flagship users, but like users who are willing to try it out and come and share publicly with the community. We've done that before at TOC meetings. Like being, now that I'm at Aviatrix, I don't have as much contact with Istio users as I had at Google. So I'm not in a great position to invite users there. I've got a handful just that I know from the community I can invite. But maybe we should plan like either the April or May TOC meeting to invite users to come and give feedback on Ambient.
If we can identify the user and they are willing to share, that's the key thing. Yes.
And they upgrade because it's an upgrade issue, not just
yeah.
Well, for this part, I was talking more about Ambient in general. Like there's so many areas that we want feedback on, right? I think we should put a survey on the docs. To be give us feedback.
And
maybe not in the docs, maybe it's
an
an Easter pedal install, but probably in the docs, I think.
Yeah, upgrade probably would be a separate survey meeting, and that would be particularly useful when we have more than one build.
Okay, I'll put together kind of a strategy for collecting feedback on Ambient in general. I'll try to include this upgrade process with tags. I've already taken 2/3 of the meeting, and I know that Stephen had some stuff to discuss regarding H3. So unless there's other burning content, I'd like to let him talk.
Just a quick request, break it into 3 parts, the upgrade. I mean, one is Z-tunnel upgrade, the other one is TOD upgrade, and then it's a gateway upgrade. Because and I hope sidecar upgrade, we can leave it out because that's not related to Ambient.
And the docs need to reflect that, so. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and then let you take it from there, Stephen. Okay. And I'll see if I can't get this camera to look at you.
Stephen, do you want me to share the GitHub issue, or you good?
I'm just going to share the doc.
Okay, great.
So this doc sort of is mostly just kind of a evaluation of different libraries for H3 and Quick. But Piotr pointed out to me a different approach, which is supporting UD. Like the whole idea is that Quick and H3 would let us do unreliable message passing and support UDP proxying. But we could proxy UDP with reliable message delivery over H2, but it would just likely be pretty slow, but we would still get UDP support. I imagine that Quick would also still have benefits for TCP proxying. So those are like 2 different orders that we could do this in. So maybe we should discuss that first.
I actually think they're 2 separate efforts. So my understanding was Piotr, so some other folks were actually looking at doing the UDP over H2 separately.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
so I think this effort is just about trying out H3.
If we have people that can do it parallel, then
yeah, I think that's fine. So I think we can just proceed with H3 here.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen web transport custom. I don't know what the trade-offs are. It seems like it's very focused on like actual like web APIs and less for proxying, but it seems like it would sort of work. It's like extended connect, right?
No, yeah, it is, but the special thing is that it has some specific provisioning for datagram over H2, which basically says that you can drop datagrams and because that's really different between UDP. So you can each point if you have your queues full or whatever, you just drop UDPs and you get the behaviors that UDP has. Read the part about datagram handling.
Okay, I did not know that was part of H2 at all. I thought that was like part of H3.
No, it is. So web transport works over both H2 and H3, and if you're using it over H2 and you send UDP datagrams, it has this provision that, unlike reliable transports, you have the option to just drop datagrams.
How does that work? I mean, it must be on the transmit side. Like if it gets backed up, then it drops them.
Exactly, which is what UDP does as well, normally.
Well, sort of. I mean, it actually.
That's a fundamental really difference between UDP and TCP. It's not reliable. It can be dropped at any time. Yes, there are other subtle differences, but
It does flow control or anything like that apply?
no, you should not need to drop it. I mean, it's that's the whole idea. But anyway, I don't want to derail that. Just want people to read it because it's a pretty weird part of the specs.
Could you actually comment on the doc that he used so we can easily come back to it?
Yeah, I can add the link to a transport.
Yeah, no, we need a separate doc to actually talk about like how we want to support UDP proxying, because there's more than just how the like Z tunnels talk to each other. But this one for now is more focused on HTTP3 and more specifically picking a dependency or picking dependencies to use for our quick transport and HTTP3 lib. The landscape in Rust for HTTP3 support, it's a little like early. There's pretty much nothing that supports regular connect. There's one library, I think it was the Amazon one that supports web transport. Or sorry, no, it was the Mozilla one that supports web transport, but that library is also pretty, it doesn't have a lot of documentation, and it doesn't let us use boring SSL. The only thing that would let us use boring SSL is Quinn, which is supported with Hyper, or the underlying library for Hyper. But pretty much my proposal is that we don't wait for all of these things to support what we need. We contribute upstream and we still go within that like Hyperion Hyper ecosystem and use their H3 library, which is a little bit lower level than the library we're currently using for H2. But we just internally abstract things so that we can use their lower level library and get H3 support sooner, provide them feedback on how they can put this into their like main higher level library. I guess the main question I have for everybody is like, is there going to like, are we against the idea of bringing in H3 earlier at the cost of like potential additional complexity, or do we want to wait for the Rust ecosystem and these other libraries to properly support things?
No, sorry, I didn't mean that. I mean, I'm all for adding H3 support, and I have no opinion on which library.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this document pretty much just provides a pretty high level matrix of what they give us off the bat and what my perceived level of activity and maturity each one has.
So just to field the question about the Quiche library, there are actually two Quiche libraries. There's Google's Quiche, which is C++, which I suspect would be, it's a big library and probably very difficult to use from Rust, given that a lot of us are still kind of Rust newbies. The other Quiche is in Rust from Cloudflare. It doesn't seem to be very well maintained. And it also doesn't seem to directly support async, which is basically the whole stack that we're using is async currently. It looks like Hyper, which is the H2 implementation that we're currently using, is built on top of Quinn for is building on top is their H3 work is currently building on top of Quinn. So we ended up kind of going the same route. The nice thing about the Quinn library is that it actually has a pretty clear API for the crypto. So we're actually already actively contributing a boring SSL implementation of their crypto. So that gets us to FIPS.
Is it decisions that we cannot back out of later? I mean, can you start with whatever you believe it's the right one right now, since you are doing the work and, you know,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I suspect eventually, you know, everything is one way or another is going to have to end up at some sort of FIP solution eventually. But you know, yeah, I think FIPS is the most important thing right now. Let's just find a solution that gets us to FIPS, and then, you know, continue. You know, if for some reason we're not happy with the library we chose, we'll just reevaluate later.
Yeah. The reason I ask about Envoy is, you know, we already taken dependency on the Wish C++ Google, which is also using Chrome. That if it is possible to use that, it may simplify, avoid some bugs, because who knows? I mean, at least we'll have the same implementation and parity of bugs in Envoy, Chrome, and what you probably know more.
Yeah, so Google's Kish is not fully integrated. It's not fully implemented for Connect, so this implementation it's also not fully integrated into Envoy. There is somebody working on that, but it's about the same level of, you know, early prototyping, I would say. There is a design doc for how to do Kish for extended Connect in Envoy, and I think it makes sense to share the structure of the configuration to program the library. But I don't think we can share code unless you try to import all of Kish into Citadel.
Yeah.
I also just generally kind of prefer to err on the side of, you know, a Rust solution as much as possible. I mean, obviously it's still wrapping boring SSL at some level to get FIPS, but, you know, eventually Rust TLS will actually have some way of achieving FIPS compliance itself, so we can back that up. But yeah, I just think debuggability, the memory safety, all the stuff that Rust gives you, you know, it would just the more Rust stuff we're using.
Well, right. For me, what I care is how much use it gets, and right now Kish has a lot more use for UDP and Quick. So if we choose any library, I don't really care which language or technology, it has to have some kind of use. We shouldn't be the one who have to, you know, iron out all the protocol edge cases.
Right. But I mean, that's to that point. I mean, Hyper is probably the standard HTTP library for Rust, and that's going to build their H3 solution on Quinn. So we're still in, you know.
Yeah, I'm referring to HTTP Connect and Mask. Mask, I think, I'm not sure if anybody's implementing it. There has to be 2 implementations, so I know Kish has it, so it has to be someone else doing it. I don't know who it is.
Yeah, Chrome is driving the Quish is that's a nice thing. It's that it's you know, kind of Chrome is driving a lot of standards and has a lot of usage and tests behind it.
Right, it's already deployed, I think, in some ways, so we know it should work. But
no, all Chrome browsers have it, so it's the core library.
Well, folks at Google, if you want to, you know, get some folks from the Google Kish team to help us out with Rust bindings, you know, just send us a chat. That'd be great.
But by the way,
yeah, but they're boggled down in XDS bindings right now. It's just already hard.
Yeah.
But Nate, I don't think. I mean, that's what I said initially. We can change it later. So if it's easier to integrate with Quinn, let's integrate with Quinn, get some feedback, figure out how it works, and we can change it when it's ready. I mean, it's not. I don't think even connect them. It's really that big of a deal. Let's test H3, do some benchmarks, maybe try another one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get it functionally working, and then go from there.
Yeah, I generally agree. I just want to express I think that you guys are on the same page already, but we should just make sure that this is kind of siloed off in kind of its own file, possibly even turned off by default, like with a build flag, or just to make sure we're not destabilizing things, since this is pretty experimental territory, I think.
Well, if it compiles, we should keep it on. I mean, everything is alpha, so we want to get feedback. I won't.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how experimental it was. If it's fine and we can compile it in, that's no problem. But let's just make sure we're not like, you know,
Yeah,
if we
I
have to
think
like
I'm
fork things. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Lynn. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think I was going to say your point actually. So I'm actually a little bit concerned about introduce this. It has to be off by default before user feels comfortable. And also, I'm also a little bit worried about like the performance impact. Hopefully it's supposed to perform better, right? But, you know, and also would this cause any of a binary impact of the Z-tunnel, like the size, the resource utilization? I think there's a lot of things to look at before we can even enable it. So it has to be default for now. And here, you know, more vendors have more confidence about this.
Yeah, we're completely on the same page. It won't even be compiled in because it'll be turned off by a feature flag in Rust, right? So, like, yeah, there's literally nothing, no effect on the binary that it will have unless it's explicitly enabled.
And that enablement is a build flag?
I don't know about if that's 100% necessary.
Well, we don't want to bloat the binary with extra dependencies, right?
Yeah.
If it's not being used.
Nate, I think we're going too far. I mean, it's probably okay to build it as a binary. Just not enable it by default as use it by default.
So I think long and short of it is there's a million ways to enable it explicitly, and we can just discuss that when we get to a design. Quad, you have
Yeah, so related to this, I think quick for downstream for connect, regular HTTP connect is already considered production stable in Envoy, so we can do it today. The concern there is that it bypasses network policy, and especially if you change from TCP to UDP, you can somehow, it might be unexpected that suddenly your protocol goes through. The data goes through when you put a policy, a firewall policy. So we should work out how that works. It's not just about changing the protocol, it's also changing that the policy around networking has to change to adapt to it.
could you expand on that just a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you use network policy in Kubernetes and you tunnel through UDP, all your rules no longer apply.
Well, if you're tunneling regardless.
I know it's about tunneling in general. It's just
Okay, yeah.
UDP is even more unexpected than TCP because people won't even see it probably in their dashboards.
John Carlson, any thoughts on that?
I haven't thought of this, but it's a good point.
Yeah. It seems like a pretty big topic and something we should probably start talking about. Where do we go from here on that? I mean, it's a great side comment in this particular discussion, but it's, you know, it seems like it's a discussion in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was an issue, but I think we should probably have an answer before alpha. That seems like a important.
Yeah, can I ask a dumb question? I saw that in the chat about Envoy support for Quick. So let's say one day we did enable Z-tunnel with HTTP 3. I assume that means like the ingress gateway waypoint all needs to have the Quick support to be able to communicate.
We'll probably do both. I mean, you can listen on both TCP and UDP at the same time.
Okay, so for backwards compatible, so they can still talk to with HTTP2 as well.
Well, UDP, yeah, Quick is not going to be faster in general. I mean, it depends on the workloads. It's not free, right?
Okay.
So
I see.
sometimes you might still use TCP and HTTP regular HTTP1 connect to HTTP2 connect.
Okay, I think that's all we had on this topic. If anybody has any other comments? Anything else on the agenda?
I think that was it.
Just about out of time anyway, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your input. I will get to work on the tag thing, and it was great to have the H3 conversation, and see you next week.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.